Not hearing anybody. Ah, yes, somebody's telling me yes. Okay, great. Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so thank you for your patience. Gazing into the abyss, a philosophical exploration of the problem of evil and suffering. How do we deal with it? Now, the fascinating part about this issue is that it is everywhere around us. And I want to begin with a story. So if you haven't read the book, The Republic by Plato, I strongly recommend you do that. It's one of the greatest works written in the Western Hemisphere on the concept of evil and justice and how to analyze those in a republic and grow as a society and as an individual. Now, what's fascinating about this is the story. It comes from in the Republic about a man named Gyges, and Gyges finds a ring, and this ring is a fascinating object or an artifact that he finds that he uses so he can start growing and becoming better, but it turns in reverse. So what happens is Gyges is on a cliff, and he's a shepherd, and on this cliff he has a crack that opens up in the ground of some sort, according to the Platonic view on this, and he falls down into this particular hole. And as he's in that hole, he finds out that something is a problem, because he finds something incredible. He finds that he is falling into a place where there were giants there, and these giants had their bodies were there, and there was one particular giant that he found that was had a ring on him that was incredibly beautiful. So what he did is he took that ring and he put it on. And when he put the ring on, he found out something later on, that the ring actually made him invisible. That ring gave him the ability to do things that he normally would not be able to do, such as going into the palace of the king, seducing the queen, taking over the kingdom. Plato is telling us in that point, in that story, that if you have the ability to overcome all the obstacles in your life that prevent you from facing the consequences from doing something evil, bad, malevolent, horrible, then you probably sooner or later will end up doing it. Do you hear that? The only reason most of us are good people, according to Plato, is because the consequences keep us good. They force us to think and to rethink how we would approach things in life. And how we approach those things makes us question whether we should do things that are problematic, evil, or hurtful to other people. Now, if it's very beneficial to me, I may rethink it and say, maybe I should do this. But what if the consequences for doing it, such as the police finding out, getting you on camera, getting put in prison, or facing the social consequences of having your friends and family possibly ostracize you? If none of those consequences are there, and we had a ring that allowed us to do that, then possibly we would. And Plato makes us think about this question, because he asks, what is more evil? To have suffering inflicted upon you intentionally for malevolent purposes, or for you to inflict suffering on another? Or basically, in another way, what is worse, for you to do evil or for evil to be done to you? How you answer that question determines whether you yourself are good or not. Because if you allow evil to be done to you rather than you doing evil, then more than likely you're leaning more toward the virtuous or the good part. If you'd say, no, I'd rather do evil than have evil done to me, then more than likely you're more malevolent or more evil than as in the Platonic concept on that, which I find to be fascinating. So the question we have before us is this ring. If it did exist, would we use it? And Plato says that even the people who are more inclined toward the evil and the malevolence in life will use the ring immediately to start doing things that are terrible. But the people who are inclined toward the good things in life won't. But give them enough time and they will. So J.R.R. Tolkien took this theme of the ring, and he did a whole series called The Lord of the Rings, which I recommend you read, by the way. And as you see here, the picture of that ring. And that ring is given to one of the most peaceful and loving creatures in all of Middle Earth in that mythology. And one of them is named is Bilbo Baggins, and Bilbo Baggins ends up passing on to his nephew, Frodo, who is a very peaceful, loving hobbit. But that ring is so dangerous and so powerful that they put it in that little hobbit's hand so he can take it to Mount Mordor to destroy it. It's a long, incredible story. But even in that story, even in that myth, even in that reality of thinking that if you take a good person and give him enough power, give him enough opportunity, give him enough ways to avoid the consequence, even the most pure and kind and loving person will sooner or later give in to the power of the ring or the power of doing things and avoiding their consequences. All of us have within us a malevolent nature or a dark side. So here are 7 questions I'm going to address in this discussion and lecture today. So if you can get that up for you. See that. All right. 1 is, why do people deny the reality of evil? Is evil best understood as ignorance? 3, what makes people commit evil? And is evil a privation or a negation of the good? What is the essential characteristic of evil? Is evil objective? And finally, what can we do about evil? So thanks for your patience. Let's go ahead and get started. So the next one here. So I have here a quote from one of the major philosophers out there. He's a wonderful book, which I strongly recommend for you. It comes from the book called The Philosopher and the Wolf. So it's fascinating. And here's the Mark Rowlands who wrote that. And what he did is he went to get a dog. He wanted a dog. And he didn't know that the dog he ended up getting was actually a wolf. And he didn't realize that until it started to grow. And that was a change in his life. Anyway, in that story about him and his journey with this wolf that he took in as a pet, he says the following regarding the problem of evil. The idea that evil is a medical condition or the result, hold on, I think you're not seeing the PowerPoint here of The Philosopher and the Wolf. Let's see here. Can you hear me? Let's see if I can get this up here. Give me a moment. Can you share it? Okay. There you go. Hopefully you can see that one. Put it from current side. There you go. All right. So Rollins says the following: the idea that evil is a medical condition or the result of a social malaise is ultimately because we have engineered in ourselves the helplessness we have carefully constructed in others. We are no longer, we think, even worthy subjects of moral evaluation. If we are bad or we are good, then this is really something else, something that must be explained in non-moral terms, something beyond our control. To explain away our moral status, to excuse our moral culpability in the manufacture of evil. This is the ultimate manifestation of the manufacture of evil. The clearest expression imaginable of the weakness that we have assiduously assembled in our own soul, to think of morality as really something else. The weakness so palpable that only a human can miss it. We are no longer strong enough to live without excuses. We are no longer even strong enough to have the courage of our convictions. What he's saying here is we deny evil, that it is just a medical condition or it's a result of the social situation around us. When we deny the reality is that we individually have to be responsible for the evil that we do as a society and as individuals, as people. We have to take that responsibility because otherwise we don't have the courage of our convictions and we are cowards. Richard Dawkins, in his book called The River Out of Eden, says that the universe we observe has precisely the properties we would expect it if there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. This is the view that's standard among atheistic philosophers and thinkers and secular thinkers. And the position was taken up by majority of philosophers throughout the last 2,000 years, that if there is no objective standard for good and evil, no objective moral law, no standard that is absolutely beyond the absolute, that it would be at the throne of something or someone like a god, then ultimately the universe has no properties other than no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. I think that view is fundamentally flawed because we all know at a deep existential level that evil is real. The question is, how do we define it? How do we deal with it? And I think by denying evil is one of the evils that we are perpetuating, as Rollins said in the previous book that I pointed out to you, and Dawkins seems to be perpetuating in his work. In her book, The Sovereignty of the Good, Iris Murdoch says something fascinating regarding the work of thinkers and writers on what it means to be the highest epitome of mankind. What does it mean to be a person who engages in the highest archetype of what it means to be a human being? And she says that Immanuel Kant abolished God and made man God in his stead. We are still living in the age of the Kantian man, a Kantian God man. Kant's conclusive exposure of the so-called proof of the existence of God, his analysis of the limitations of speculative reason, together with his eloquent portrayal of the dignity of rational man, has made the result that may possibly dismay him. How recognizable, how familiar is that man, so beautifully portrayed in Kant's work, when confronted with the reality of his own judgment and his own conscience, elevates his reason above all things. That individual is not a Christ-like figure, but like Lucifer, an individual who puts reason above everything else is not a good person, but a Luciferic person. Lucifer is the term used in Hebrew referring to the original name of the Satan, or the Satan. Let me see if you guys can see this. Lucifer, let me see if I can see. Can you guys see the slide where it shows a picture of a man with horns? I'm not sure if my technology is working out properly here.
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. All right, let's see. Presenter view, play from current side. All right, wonderful. All right, so you see a picture here, which it's a malevolent being. This is the classic person called the Satan, or the Shaitan. This individual, let's see if it's properly working. Okay, you can still see that as this the picture with horns?
No, not anymore.
Not anymore? Okay, let me see if I get that in there. And me a moment. That point. Share. Okay, how about now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay, great. So what you see here is a picture of a gentleman with horns. Horns is a symbolizing of the goat, which is an ancient biblical concept that there's a difference between the sheep and the goats. The goats indicate evil and the sheep indicate goodness. Anyway, the classic figure called the Shaitan, or the Lucifer, is considered the epitome or the embodiment or the archetype of evil. I am convinced that such a being, if such a being exists, theologically speaking, I think there is such a being, but this being, it would not be the epitome or the absolute essence of evil itself, because logically speaking, evil is a denial of, or an absence of, or an opposite of the goodness itself. So evil itself, if this person is completely, utterly evil, it wouldn't work logically, because evil is a deprivation of goodness. Evil pulls away or is a parasite on goodness. And I'll explain that later on. So if such a being exists, he would be very powerful, very intelligent, and those two qualities are actually good qualities. So then he's not absolutely evil. Absolute evil cannot exist, logically speaking, and I'll argue that later on. But this being, nevertheless, is the highest epitome of something that can be evil, because this being has denied the absolute goodness of the essence of goodness itself, which would be the archetype of good, which would be God himself. This being, in a sense, in the story says that in the Hebrew scriptures, that he walked away from his post in heaven as the guardian of the throne of God. I wonder what they're guarding God from. Anyway, that's a whole different discussion. Him and a bunch of archangels were guarding, a bunch of archangels, namely some of the ones in Christian theology and mythology are Gabriel, Raphael, Michael, and of course Lucifer. And there are a few others that are mentioned. And Lucifer is this one. Lucifer, is the name means the son of the morning star, or he is as bright as a morning star, as well as beautiful as a morning star. And he left heaven, he was thrown out of heaven, he was cast out of heaven with a legion of other angels, because he said to himself, as it says in the prophet Isaiah, I shall lift my throne above the Most High, I shall not bow down to him. And he was ended up thrown out of heaven because of his pride. And the Christian theology says that the highest sin you could possibly commit is not lust, not greed, not murder, it's pride. It's looking at others as infantile ants when you are greater and better and more glorious than them. Pride is the thing that stops you from looking up and seeing anything greater than yourself. It's also the thing that can shatter you, especially when you fall or fail or completely become devastated. So Satan is full of his own self, full of his own pride. And the term Satan is a term that actually means the deceiver, or the blamer, or the one who brings up a count against the people of God. And the interesting thing about Martin Luther, the great theologian, said, even the devil is God's devil. Because you think the devil is strong and powerful? He's nothing compared to God. God can blow him out like a whiff of a candle at your birthday cake. He can wipe him out completely. But the infinite being of God's wisdom allows this existence of this being to continue to live and move in the world, because it is part of the divine plan to mold and make his people better. People do not grow in times of comfort. They only grow in times of difficulty. And to allow this being to exist is one of the reasons God allows our growth. They're kind of mixed together. This being exists because God allows him to exist. And there are different questions theologically of why and how that works. And there's fascinating stories about how he integrates into theology and into our real lives. Do the demonic exist? I think they do at some level. There's also the angelic realm. So there's a constant war on that spiritual plane theologically. And there's so much we can discuss and talk about that issue maybe at a different time. But such a being does exist. And how do we deal with this being? Well, primarily, if this being did exist, and I'm convinced he does, it doesn't follow that I can blame everything on the devil. It's still my responsibility to act and be the man I need to be and do the things I need to do as an individual, and to alleviate the suffering and evil in my own world, whether such a being exists or not. Question number one I want to deal with is why do people deny the reality of evil? Why do people do that? Well, I'm thinking there are two primary reasons people do deny it. But as we discuss those, and they'll be called tolerance and relativism, which I'll talk about in a bit. People deny evil for two primary reasons, tolerance and relativism. And I'll discuss these as we go on. But let's look at this one here. This is a picture, a fascinating one. It's a very famous picture of a kidnapping that happened in 1983. Details of that for you. All right. So on October 1, 1993, 12-year-old Polly Hannah Klaas was having a slumber party when a strange man holding a knife entered her bedroom, tied up all the girls, and put pillowcases over their heads. The intruder then took a sobbing Polly off into the night. Her friends stood back trying to untie themselves. When that didn't work, one girl was able to bring her hands under her feet to free herself. The girls then awakened Polly's mother, who immediately called the police. After 2 billion images were circulated around the world, Polly's body was found December 3rd. It was 3 months too late. According to the FBI, terrible situation, and it happens still today. According to the FBI report in 2019, there were 421,394 entries for missing children. In 2018, the total number of missing children entries and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is 424,066. Ladies and gentlemen, evil is real, and it happens on a daily basis. Anybody who denies evil, I think, is too academic for their own good or too ignorant to accept the reality, or as Rollins said, not having the moral courage to recognize that there are things in the world, there are people in the world, there are events in the world that must be called evil. Otherwise, we cannot deal with them properly by denying this evil. And in his amazing book, The Brothers Karamazov, Fyodor Dostoevsky, the atheist, has a bunch of characters in the book. It's a fascinating book. One of the characters is an atheist named Ivan, and his brother is Alyosha. Alyosha is actually a young man who's trying to be a priest. In there, they have a very fascinating discussion about evil and goodness, and it's a wonderful book, powerful book, very difficult to read because Russian literature, especially from that period, is not easy, but it is profound. Ivan, the atheist, argues with his brother and asks him why God allows suffering and evil, and he tells him the following: tell me yourself, I challenge you. Imagine you're creating the fabric of human destiny with the object of making men happy in the end, of giving them peace and rest at last. And it is essential and inevitable to torture to death only one teeny creature, the baby beating its breast with his fist, for instance. And to find the edifice of that unavenging tears, the thing that you would construct the architect of all the world upon those tears. Tell me, would you allow this creature, this little baby, to suffer in order for you to erect the manifest architecture of the universe? And Alyosha responded softly, no, I would not. Then Ivan asked, and how could God allow it? It's a question called the problem of evil in theology, which is not a topic for my discussion today, but it does put the blame of evil on the doorstep of God's throne. I think that's problematic because many of the evils that we've done and perpetuated, for example, what happened to Polly was actually done by the individual, but it did happen on God's watch. And that's where theologians come up with incredible answers to address this. Maybe at another time I could take that up. So I mentioned to you, there are two primary reasons I'm convinced that people deny evil exists. The primary reasons are tolerance and relativism. Tolerance and relativism. For example, in her book, Evil, the Science Behind Humanity's Dark Side, Julia Shaw argues we should not call serial killers, pedophiles, rapists evil. These monstrous acts and the people who commit them are not evil, but disturbed. Shaw argues that all evil is relative. However, she goes on and goes out of her way to condemn these acts as horribly evil, horribly awful, or inexcusable, but they're not evil. She spends the majority of her book justifying these acts by trying to understand them. And there's a distinct difference, ladies and gentlemen, from explaining something to justifying it. And sometimes you can slowly shift between the two. For example, if you find a man who's abusing his children and you try to explain what happened to the judge, well, this man was abused as a child, does that now justify his abuse of his children? Absolutely not. It explains it, but it doesn't justify it. And that's the problem Julia Shaw leads into. By trying to explain evil, she slowly begins to justify it. And that is a thorn in her side. Because I've said it well, and I'll say it again. A rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. And sewage by any other name would smell just as foul. So one of the reasons we deny evil is called, see here, I called it tolerance. We're tolerating it. We're trying to understand it. And the other reason we deny it is a problem. When I put it up there for you, relativism. So more on the issue of tolerance. These two books I recommend to you, Frank Ferretti and D.A. Carson's books on tolerance. What they're actually arguing is in the effort of trying to be tolerant by other people, we're actually putting up with and justifying and making light of evil itself. There are those who are tolerant regarding, those who are tolerant are regarded as superior to those who are intolerant. But the problem is when you start tolerating what is vile and evil and horrible and disgusting and bloody and malevolent, you become just as problematic as those you're trying to justify. Under the moderate paradigm, tolerance looks something like this. This is what it used to be, tolerance. I disagree with you, but I insist on your right to articulate your opinion and speak, however wrong or stupid I may think it is. That's what tolerance used to mean. I disagree with you, but you can speak your mind on whatever you want to speak on. However, modern tolerance, in what's called the cancel culture today, has said, no, we don't buy into that. You can believe what you want, but you cannot speak it. You're not allowed to say anything that we find offensive as a culture. And this has led to what I mentioned it to you, called the cancel culture. And it's also led to making the prominent cultural position the standard position. And that is a form of evil because it suppresses people from speaking up against evils, as well as, of course, it suppresses problematic points of view as well. The problem is that in order for us to be moral beings, we must judge. The moral point of view cannot be moral unless it condemns things that are evil as evil. Making moral judgments making a moral judgment about whether to help a bullied kid in a classroom or speaking up about rape in your building is a moral judgment. To be moral beings, we must, to the best of our ability, use our reasoning and our empathy to discern what our obligation is to other people and to condemn certain acts such as pedophilia, rape, and racism as actually evil and wrong. I think it would be evil not to. The New York Times, which is not very conservative newspaper, actually very liberal newspaper, in one of their columnists, Nicholas Kristof, argues that professors in the humanities and social sciences and across the field are heavily discriminating against people who are not in their position. The majority of professors in the sciences, in the humanities are more liberal and more leftist in their ideology, and they're very much discriminatory against those who speak against their positions. And not only do they discriminate, but they also don't hire them or cancel them or fire them because they're speaking points of view that they disagree with. This is not only contra the academy, it's contra the very republic of what we stand for in the United States, which is the ability to speak your consciousness into public, to be able to stand up for what you believe and speak it. And whether it's right or wrong, that can be challenged in a robust academic debate. But you can't debate something if you're just fired and kicked out, can you? So when we deal with relativism, we're looking at the world, as you see in this picture here. Is this a full tree or is it not? There are things in life that we can't tell whether they're truly good or truly evil. That's true. But that does not mean evil does not exist. It does not mean goodness does not exist. When a man walks into a fire and saves a child and burns half his body, he did something good and we honor him. We give him an award. We lift him up as a hero. When a man takes that same child and abuses that child, kills that child, strangles that child, is what happened to Polly Klaas, that's evil. Some things are plain and some things are not. But merely because we have a blurring of the lines sometimes is not reason for us to deny it in all times. Skip this one. So question 2, is evil best understood as ignorance? Is evil best understood as ignorance? So let me go into that. So 2 great books called the Pythagoras and Aristotle's book on the Ecumenian ethics. Let me talk about those. So in his book on the Ecumenian ethics, Aristotle, the great philosopher, as well as his teacher Plato in his book, the Pythagoras, tells us that the essence of evil, now get this, evil, he's going to tell you what evil is here. Evil is actually ignorance. That is, you don't know better. The reason people hurt each other, the reason people rob, steal, blame anybody else for what they're doing is because they really don't know better. If they really knew the truth, they would not do evil. In the Pythagoras, for example, Socrates, the teacher of Plato, argues, hold on a minute, let me pause here. Can you guys see my screen here where it says Pythagoras and Aristotle?
No.
No.
No? Fascinating. How about now?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, we can.
Okay, all right. Excuse me, I moved on further here. So let me back it up a little bit so I could give you that. For some reason, I'm having some issues here with the technology. All right. So there's this one. All right, that was the question. The first one is, why did the people deny the reality of evil? I talked about Polly right there. That's her. This is the FBI database pictures of the missing children around the world. The Brothers Karamazov, I mentioned that. That's the book there. This is the book I mentioned called Evil, the Science Behind Humanity's Dark Side. And these here are the two books on tolerance by Frank Ferretti and D.A. Carson. Okay, so the first question I answered today was, let's see here, where did it go? There it is. Why do people deny the reality of evil? And I give you two reasons: tolerance and relativism. People tolerate it too much and they are relativistic about it. They refuse to claim anything as objective. So that leads me to question 2. Is evil best understood as ignorance? And now moving on. So I mentioned Nicomachean ethics. Aristotle and Plato argue that evil is actually ignorance. No one is willing to do anything willingly evil because evil is a form of deprivation or harm to an individual. Why would anybody want to hurt themselves and hurt others around them just to do that? That doesn't seem wise enough or irrational enough. So anybody who's rational, argues Plato and Aristotle, would never do evil because evil is going to hurt them in the long run. So in the Pythagoras, Socrates asks Pythagoras, one of the main characters, why do people do evil such as overindulging in sex, drink, and food? Pythagoras reasons because these things are pleasurable. Then Socrates asks him, what is it exactly about these things that makes you say they're so bad for you? Is it the fact that they give you pleasure at the moment? The fact that each of them is pleasurable? Or is it the fact that in the long term, they'll make you ill, make you poor, or bring about lots of other things like that? Obviously, the reason why people say these things are bad is the latter. The reason people do evil is because they think that ultimately it's going to bring them some kind of pleasure or good. Otherwise, why would you do it? No one rationally will do something evil unless they actually think they're going to get something good out of it. That's the position of Aristotle and Plato. So Socrates reasons that the only reason a sane man would do something evil that has long-term misery for him is because he honestly thought it would bring him long-term happiness. For example, somebody robs a bank, it's evil, but why would he do that? Because he honestly believes by doing this minimally problematic thing, hopefully he's trying to avoid death and pain and suffering in the process, long-term, that money will bring him stability, peace, and an island and some kind of condo somewhere on the sea where he'll be finding happiness and peace. Otherwise, he wouldn't do it, now would he? No sane man would do evil just to do evil unless he was ignorant. It is impossible, Socrates and Aristotle argue, and Plato, for a man to do evil unless he didn't know better. And I'm arguing to you that's not necessarily the case. For example, I have been to many hospitals, I'm sure you have, where there are incredibly intelligent, well-researched specialists in the field of cardiology, in the field of the field of studying the heart and lungs as well. And some of these specialists, these doctors, are outside smoking cigarettes. I've seen them with my own eyes. I know them personally. There's been work done on research on people who are studying health conventions about how to become healthier individuals. They have doctors and medical professionals from around the world show up at these conferences. And the fascinating thing is, you know what they go on their lunch breaks? To these grease joints and eat the most unhealthy foods. They know better, but they don't choose to do the right thing. Why is that? Why do people who know better do evil? Or hurt themselves or do things that are not helpful for them? Let me clarify what I mean by that. Is it possible then for you to know something is wrong and still do the wrong thing? Let me pause here in a moment in my lecture and ask you guys a question. Have you ever done something you know is wrong, you know the consequence for it are wrong, and you still did it? In the chat area, you can go ahead and chat, put a note in there if you have it. Have you ever done something that you knew was wrong, but you still did it? Most people have written yes. Some people have written no. The vast majority of us would say, yes, I have, because maybe at the moment it felt good, or maybe at the moment it was the expedient thing to do. And that's why I think Plato and Aristotle, although they're right in some sense, that we end up doing wrong things because we don't know better. Sometimes we do things wrong even though we know better. So what makes normal people then commit evil? What is it that makes people do that? Well, there's some discussion on this question, and let me get into some details behind it for you. Consider an attempted bombing that occurred in April 20, 1999 at Columbine High School in Columbine, Colorado. 12th grade seniors Eric Harris and Dillian Kibble murdered 12 students and one teacher. They planned the massacre for about a year. USA Today refers to the attack as a planned, as a grand, if badly implemented, terrorist bombing. In his journal, Kibble wrote the following: I have no happiness, no ambition, no friends, no love. Give me the gun. I hope I want to use it to spray those SOBs. I know his name is Vodka. Dylan is his name. What else can I do? I stopped the pornography. I tried not to pick on people. Obviously, the least power against me. Funny. And this is very jumbled because his journal is jumbled. Funny how I've been thinking about her over the last few decades, giving myself fake realities that she might have liked me. My bad. I have always been hated by everyone and everything. Just never aware. Goodbye, all. The pair subsequently committed suicide after executing 13 other souls. They planned to have a greater death toll than Timothy McVeigh, the former U.S. soldier who committed a major bombing in the U.S. federal building in 1995 that killed 168 people. Eric and Dylan had 2 propane bombs in the cafeteria, which were set to explode at 11:17 a.m. They loaded their cars with bombs and gasoline. They set to detonate at noon. That was the start of, quote, a lunch in the school at the time for maximum density of human bodies. The bombs did not explode. They didn't know how to set those up. Why did they do this? I'm convinced, and if you read his journals, Peebles and a bunch of other people, some people commit evil because they have become bitter, angry, and lost all form of hope. They no longer do it because they think it's going to bring me long-term happiness. No, they do it because they know it's going to bring long-term misery to themselves. And why go down in flames when you can take everyone to hell with you? I think that's the position that some people malevolently give into. What they do is they become so bitter and angry at life that they no longer want to live it and no longer think anybody else deserves to live it either. There is a reason people commit evil. And that one of those reasons is that they no longer want to live and they lose hope. It's not because of ignorance at all. Aristotle, in his book on this question, got into it in more detail. Aristotle said one of the reasons, other than bitterness, rage, and envy, that people commit evil is possibly because of moral weakness. Moral weakness sometimes overrides even the most rational and good of people. Consider the case of starvation, of food, or even of love. In these cases, a highly moral person who lacks a loving relationship may settle for a lesser good, like a premarital or postmarital affair, to satisfy that hunger for desire for love. Or a person who's starving, a good person, would consider stealing, breaking a moral law of theft, in order for him to feed himself and his children. Why? Because he's weak inside, because he's starving, he's hungry. So he allows himself, this weakness overcomes his desire for goodness. In psychological terms, it's called ego depletion. Let me show you something here. This is the Eric Dillard and Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, the ones that I mentioned to you, that the reason I believe that they may have done what they've done is because they're bitter and angry at life. And if you read their own journals and their writings, it's because they don't want happiness at all. Pascal, the great writer and philosopher, said the reason people do everything in life is because they want to be happy. And Aristotle argued this in one level as well. But they didn't want to be happy. They were not happy. They were miserable, and they wanted to die and take everyone with them. This is brought out in this in the Dark Knight series, and also recently the film on the Joker, where one of the lines which I found fascinating said the following: "Some men aren't looking for anything logical like money. They can't be bought, bullied, reasoned, or negotiated with. Some men just want the world to burn, or they want to watch the world burn." That goes back to my position earlier about Klebold and Harris and some of the mass killers out there, or even people that you may know personally who are just angry with life. They're weak, or they're malevolent. They're angry. They're bitter. So the concept is ego depletion in psychology. Ego depletion is a term that refers to a person's will to do what is best for her begins to have a limited pull on their life. Their mental resources are theoretically used up. At that point, a man can lie, steal, or go against even his better judgment and do what he knows to be wrong. So, for example, if you are hungry and you said to yourself, "I'm going to take this diet, and I'm no longer going to eat chocolate cake," and you put a chocolate cake in your fridge, and every time you open that fridge, you see the chocolate cake. And if you haven't had enough sleep and you're angry or you're stressed out and your energy has gone constantly toward your work and your children and your family, and now you're just weak, what's called ego depletion kicks in, and then you reach for the cookie, or you reach for the cake, or you reach for the theft, or you reach for the illicit affair. This is ego depletion is one of the reasons people commit evil, as well as malevolence. So going on to question 4, why is evil a privation or a negation of the good? So the great writer Augustine argued well that all of nature is fundamentally good. The world is fundamentally a good place. Everything that exists has goodness in it. Even devils have goodness in them. For a contemporary pop cultural example of what he's talking about would be Darth Vader from the Star Wars series, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But Augustine basically said the following: when, however, a thing is corrupted, its corruption is an evil because it is by just as much a privation for the good. Where there is no privation of the good, there is no evil. Where there is evil, there is a corresponding diminishing of the good. Augustine is saying that evil is a privation or corruption or the absence of the way things ought to be. So, and an example he would use, or analogy, is this: evil is like light. Goodness is like light, and evil is darkness. Darkness is just the absence of light. And goodness is that which exists essentially, which is in the very nature of God, where evil is that which moves away from or denies God, or denies the very nature of God. So evil, in a sense, is a privation of goodness, or a corruption of goodness, or the absence of goodness. This is what Augustine argued. And this is put out wonderfully in the series from the Star Wars genre by a character named Anakin Skywalker, who becomes the archetype of evil known as the Darth Vader character. He's a classic villain, even though he's a mythological villain. He nevertheless has some good in him. And if you were to watch the series, like in episode 6, excuse me, his wife, Padme, said that there was some good in him, and she saw it. Even his friends knew that. He even gives his life for his own son later on in the series. He is corrupted. He gives in to the darkness within himself, where he becomes the evil he wants to fight. And Friedrich Nietzsche said that well. Beware of fighting monsters, because you may become one. And this happens in this series where he ends up fighting the dark side. In the process of fighting it, he becomes seduced by it and becomes sucked into it. But even there's still a little bit of goodness in him. Question number 5. What is the essential characteristic of evil? Let me back up a little bit regarding this one. Augustine's evil is a privation, negation of the good. There is something to say a little bit more about that. Not all evil is a privation or an absence of the way things ought to be. For example, what it means that evil cannot exist unless there's something good to hurt, break, or destroy. That's the concept. For evil is like a parasite that draws on the lifeblood of the living, like a vampire or bat. It cannot exist without something to destroy it, like rust. Good can exist without evil, but evil needs good for it to exist or to corrupt. It is possible that some evils are not a lack of good. For example, consider pain. Pain is an undeniable feeling of discomfort, not a lack of anything pleasurable per se. And some pain is good, as it can prevent us from getting burned. For example, pulling your hand away from a hot stove. Furthermore, a malicious torturer is not lacking in kindness or love, but has the proprieties and properties of something essentially evil. That is the desire to see someone suffer. Thomas Aquinas, in his wonderful work called the Summa Theologia, argues that evil is, using Aristotelian ideas, more than just a privation of evil or a denial of evil, but it is that which lacks the potency and lacks the perfection of it. Arguing from a theological, but more precisely a teleological point of view, he argues that evil can be explained in ontological and moral terms, but it suggests not just an absence of some good, but actual giving itself over to it. So in a sense, you become a form of evil, not just a denial of it by constantly doing it. So lying once, twice, 3 times doesn't make you a liar, but lying perpetually over and over again, where it becomes part of your nature, you actually become a liar. At one point, does somebody telling a lie become a liar? I don't think it's by telling one lie, but it's a constant process of life where you actually become a form of the character that you're trying to do or say. So I don't think evil is fundamentally a denial or a privation of good, although that's part of it. And moving on to the next one here is, what are the essential characteristics of evil? So Alvin Plantinga, who was a wonderful author, he argued that evil can be divided in 2 ways. That's natural evil and moral evil. Natural evil is things like getting attacked by a shark, being diagnosed with lung cancer, or being crushed by a falling boulder. That's natural evil. Well, there is also moral evil, which is feelings of, dreams about, or desires toward, or actions of cruelty, malevolence, and pain that you inflict upon other people just to see them suffer, or doing things to others that are not helpful or destructive. So Alvin Plantinga argues that the essential characteristics of evil are 2. There's natural evil, then there's also moral evil. And Aquinas, as I mentioned earlier, said that evil is more than just a privation, it lacks perfection. And he said this even further, and I want to add to this and capitalize on it. He said, using reasoning, we could say evil is a violation of purpose. Once you have gone away from or denied your purpose in life, you are now doing something evil. For example, the main purpose of a toaster is to toast. Now I can use it for something other than toasting, such as to hold my door or even beat somebody with it who's trying to break into my home. That's a fundamental violation of the purpose of a toaster. And I could actually violate the purpose of my life by moving away from its fundamental reason for living. They're doing things I shouldn't be doing. That's what Aquinas would say. And there's Platonism, where I pointed that out to you. He said there's moral evil, such as actions, feelings, dreams, etc., caused by desire toward cruelty. Then there's natural evil, things that are beyond your control, such as getting hit by a boulder or getting in a car accident. Those are two types. In conclusion, I'm going to summarize and point out the 4 fundamental characteristics I think that make something evil here. Evil is having malevolent motives, that is, wishing ill intent and destruction on another human being just to see them suffer. Evil is showing serious and excessive harm, that is going over and above the protective necessary damage one must do to survive or protect. Evil is having lack of morally acceptable excuses, such as for such acts, this is no sufficient reason given for the first 2. And finally, evil then is a summary from a spiritual perspective, divorcing yourself from the center of life, that is, what is the true, the good, and the beautiful, God. So evil, 4 things. It's malevolent motives, showing excessive harm, lack of morally acceptable excuses for these behaviors, and divorcing yourself from the source of it all, God. These are the 4. I mentioned those to you. And the question I have here as we conclude is evil objective? When I say objective, meaning is it more than just what I think? And I'm arguing it is more than just what we think. Because although you can't prove something like, I can prove to you that I'm talking using technology or mathematical certainty, such as 5 times 5 is 25, or the components of water being H2O. Those are physical constructs. But things that are ideological constructs are more difficult to prove. I think the denial of evil or the tolerance of evil is itself a form of evil, because it perpetuates a form of malevolence in problems and culture that make it worse. Is evil objective? I think it's a lot more than what I want it to be or what my culture wants it to be. Consider this argument, and I'm capitalizing from the great thinker Immanuel Kant. He said the following: the universe is not as it should be. There's more than enough evil. If the universe is not as it should be, then there is a way the universe should be. So then there is a way the universe should be. If there is a way the universe should be, then the universe has a designer. So the universe has a designer. Thus, to assume evil is to assume a designer. Moving on. This designer must be able to judge with omnibeneficence these properties, which include everything which we call by God. So you cannot have evil, good without evil. You cannot have good without a moral law. You cannot have a moral law without a moral law designer. That designer would have to be God. So the very fact that we have evil in the world is evidence that there's good, and the fact that there's evidence that there's good proves that there's a moral law. That moral law cannot have exist unless there's a moral law maker. That moral law maker must be omnipotent, transcendent to all cultures, places, times, and space. The only being who fits that category, or to put it this way, who has it on his resume, would be God. Therefore, evil must be objective. It's not in my mind. Finally, let me wrap it up. What can we do about evil? What can we do about evil? I'll show you something here. One moment.
The future of the Supreme Court is in.
Okay, I'm going to talk about here. I'm going to wrap this up in a moment, guys. I have a little video clip I want to show you in this regard. Okay. What can we do about evil? Let me demonstrate it with a video, then I'll conclude this whole discussion. Let me know if you can see this screen, guys. Looks like a young lady.
Yeah.
Is that a
Yeah,
yes?
good.
Yes, you can see it?
We can see it.
All right, great. All right, so here, listen up. This is called Looking Beyond Borders, a 4-minute experiment.
You have a nice mustache. One, two, three, four, five, six, five. Sechs, fünf.
Are you new in Bali?
Yeah, 8 months.
And are you alone here or with your family?
Nobody. This life. Sometimes nice. Sometimes not good.
Okay.
Beatrice.
Office.
Oh my God, I'm keeping my eyes on you. Beatrice.
Office.
Oh my God, I'm keeping my eyes on you. I expect you to ask my number.
You're strong. Thank you so much. We will go to the zoo. Maybe this few days. It takes a few months.
I love it. Yes, you can do it.
When I was looking into her eyes, I was trying to see what I could tell from the life that she lived, and I think I could tell that there was a lot of experience with that.
Doesn't matter, look at the eyes or something, just give yourself a chance to talk.
and to look at the other person.
Okay. That video, one I showed you, was about refugees that come into Europe. And one of the ways we can deal with evil, one of the ways we can address it, is by looking at other people as people, human beings. Everyone has a journey, everyone has a story, everyone has problems that they deal with. Marcus Aurelius, one of the great emperors, one of the only philosophers in history who was actually an emperor who ruled a nation. His journal was found about 100 years afterwards. It was a secret journal that he had. Imagine finding the president's journal 100 years later. And he wrote the following in it. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, surly. They are like that because they can't tell good and evil, or because of other reasons. But like I have seen the goodness, the beauty and goodness, and the ugliness and the evil, I have recognized the wrongdoer has a relatively related mind just like my own. Same thing, I have been born and have blood just like him. I feel angry, I hate as well. We are all born and work together. We all have feet and hands and eyes, like two rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. To feel angry at someone, to turn your back on him, these are unnatural. And what Aurelius is saying is, recognize that people go through things in life, whether they're robbing, whether they're helping, whether they're praising, whether they're cursing, because they're people. And when we see people as people, I think then we can reach out and make a difference and be the good that overcomes the evil in their world. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said the following: the line separating good and evil passes not through states, nor through classes, nor between political parties either, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. This line shifts inside us. It oscillates within the years. And even within our hearts, overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. The line separating good and evil is not between political parties, those who support Trump or those who support Biden in our example, but right through every human heart. And in conclusion, and this is the conclusion, N.T. Wright, Bishop of Durham, former canon, theologian of Westminster Abbey and dean of Lichfield Cathedral, said the following: somehow, in a way we are inclined to find offensive, God has to get his boots muddy, and it seems to get his hands bloody, to put the world back to rights. The primary sin of humanity consists in putting the knowledge of good and evil before the knowledge of God. Don't just philosophize, do something about suffering. Go, help the people in your world. Help the neighbor across the street who needs help with their kids. The starving individual that you know doesn't have enough food. The student that you know who needs tutoring. The young single mom who needs help with her disabled child. Your neighbor or your family member you know is struggling in different ways. Everyone can help somebody else. And in helping others, in putting water in their garden, you actually water your own. That's how you overcome evil. Thank you. At this time, I'll open up for any discussion or questions or points of devotion on that on this issue. Stop share.
Critical children's programs around the world are
If you have a question, feel free to voice it. I can hear you, or you can of course type it in as well.
Professor Sweis, could you define relativism again and how that applies to how people deny the reality of evil?
Sure. So relativism is a philosophical position that argues that morals are situational or subjective to their environment. For example, if I were to tell you I am tall, that's relative to my circumstance. So if I was in a, let's say, a kindergarten classroom or a second grade classroom, I'm definitely tall compared to these little kids, right? Yeah, are you there, Logan?
Yes, I am. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm here. Thank you.
So I'm tall compared to these little kids. But if I stood with the Chicago Bulls or the NBA players, I'll definitely be short compared to them, because that's relative to the circumstance. So relativism is this position that says evil is relative to its circumstance. There is no objective evil at all. And I'm arguing that that position is philosophically problematic. It cuts its own throat. Because for someone to say there's no such thing as evil is to assume that their position itself is good, that denies evil. But there is no evil, so you really, so denying evil becomes a form of evil. Because logically speaking, if I were to tell you there's nothing in life that's good or evil, I would believe what I just told you was good. That it's good to say there's nothing in life that's good and evil, and you should remain neutral. But that is a good position. But I just denied there's any good position. So a relativist will tell you no such thing as good and evil, but if you take a bat to their windshield of their car, or you steal their iPhone and run it over or put it in the toilet, or hit their wife, they'll tell you, you just did something evil. But that person is contradicting themselves. Ideologically, they don't believe in evil, but when you have evil perpetuated upon them, they change their tune. They start singing a different song. So ideologically, we can pontificate, we can write about evil, doesn't exist, it's all relative. But the reality is it does. And I don't think we can deny it.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, somebody sent a question in. It's on a Facebook page. It says, are people naturally good and do bad things, or naturally evil and do good things? The question in theology is that people were fundamentally born good. That would be in the Edenic Garden of Eden, but through a deviation from and a divorce from the fundamental construct of goodness itself, which is God, has devalued our sense of goodness and rightness, leading us to a propensity to do evil, which in theology is called sin. And that comes from the nature called original sin. So people are, generally speaking, more prone to do that which is self-centered for them and their family and their community. And when push comes to shove, they will kill, rob, and destroy whatever they need to in order to preserve that unity of themselves and their families. So people are prone to do that, which means people are naturally have a propensity toward evil. However, they also have a propensity toward goodness, and people can do a lot of good in themselves. So I'm inclined to lean toward both positions, but more toward that we do need redemption. We do need a link toward the transcendent. We do need salvation. We do need cleansing. We do need sanctification. So fundamentally, we're flawed until we're connected to a transcendent source that cleans us, that makes us good or better than goodness. And it's always a process. It's not an easy answer. You cannot be good on your own. And theologically speaking, I'm convinced that God doesn't pick people who are good. God takes people who are normal people and makes them good because of his love and goodness and grace.
If God is making people good, doesn't that mean that they started off as bad?
Look at it this way. The sun is the center of our solar system. The further things get away from the sun, the colder and darker they get. God, fundamentally speaking, would be the archetype or the centerpiece of the energy source of morality in the universe. If such a being exists, that being would be the center or archetypal center of the universe of goodness. Mankind, when we end up doing evil over and over again as a society, as a people, as a group, we slowly start pulling away from that source. So we become a form of, we get cold and dark inside, which is a form of evil. In order for us to become redeemed and better, we have to get closer to that source. And that ultimately means, that's what's called salvation in theology.
Hello, Professor. I was just curious. So essentially what we're talking about, good versus evil, is the nature aspect. Are we just at this point not taking into consideration the nurture aspect? Because I feel like we're breaking it down like real simplified rather than, you know, using outside influences to say the person that you are as a child is not the person you're as an adult after all the things you experience, be it by your parents or just your culture, whatever you go through. Is that not what we're doing? Just kind of keeping it real simple?
I'm not understanding what you're trying to say. Please reframe the question for me, Robin.
I would say I feel like we're really oversimplifying good versus evil, even from a philosophical standpoint, because it just seems that we're not taking into consideration all of the outside factors that can make someone, I guess, evil over time. They may not be evil, but may experience evil things and transition back and forth between what we're speaking about. Is that not correct?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. There is a double whammy nature there. Your circumstances, your community, your family, and the things that happen to you can slowly mold you. As Friedrich Nietzsche would say, that does not kill you, makes you stronger. However, that which does not kill you can also make you cruel. So people who've been through abuse and constant bullying as a child and a form of deprivation of any type of glory or goodness or peace in their life can become bitter, angry, and a danger to themselves and everyone around them. And I believe I addressed that earlier with Kevin Keebold and Eric Harris, who were the killers in the Columbine massacre. Throughout their young lives, they saw their lives as complete misery. Of course, they relatively lived a nice suburban home that were well-fed, well taken care of, loved by their parents, but they still felt empty inside. So sometimes people can overcome that circumstance, but other times the circumstances can overcome them. I think it's problematic to blame our society and our community for the evils that are perpetuated by individuals. Although we can't ignore what society and our society has created, an environment of inequality, of you could call it. The common term today is systemic racism, which I think is problematic, but it has its own connotations. But if you create a society or an environment for a child that's completely detrimental to their well-being, do not expect that child to grow up to be a loving, healthy individual. They will sometimes explode out of their anger and their own frustration, their own bitterness upon everyone around them. So there's, I think, the nature and nurture, both of these need to be looked at together.
And in relation to that topic that you used earlier, would you say that because they lived relatively, I guess, nice lives in comparison to other people who do not turn into mass murderers, would we say that they have a higher propensity for evil?
It's hard to say, isn't it? You can't know until after it happens. There are people in the world who live in adjunct poverty and really terrible circumstances around the world, whether it's North Korea or in India. that are some of the most poverty-stricken places in the world, and they're not doing the things that other people who live in relatively comfortable circumstances are doing. So it's hard to blame completely your circumstance for it. I don't want to do that.
And in relation to that, would you then say that because they grew up in, I guess, softer circumstances, is it that they are innately weaker because they don't really experience hardship in the comparison that you just made, and so therefore they're not equipped with dealing with certain things, and so that is kind of the outlet? It's immense anger or frustration rather than learning how to balance that a little bit better.
Yeah, that well said. Yeah, I didn't think about it in that realm well before, but yeah, I think that would contribute to it, definitely. Absolutely.
If they had more weakness because they lacked experiences that gave them moral fortitude.
That's kind of how I feel, I guess. Yeah. I just feel that it's easy, I guess, in listening to this, I feel it's easy to feel constricted when you haven't seen anything other than something that's simplified for you. I mean, they lived in, I think, in many cases, like almost upper middle class experiences. Their parents tried to be very active in their lives. And so that kind of doesn't give them the framework to deal with things that are outside of that comfort level. I guess that's how I would see it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well said. Well said. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for being with me here. Hopefully it was a fruitful discussion on the evil and the problem of evil and what that is. It was a pleasure having you. Thank you for being with me. Goodbye.
Bye, thank you.